So let me give you an overview here. So when we talk about IRS Forms 1095s, you have a series of them, and I really need to explain things before we get into the nitty gritty. So when any business, no matter how small, hires their first employee, they enter a world full of complicated and confusing IRS forms and payroll taxes. I mean, that's for sure, okay? And hiring should be a time for focusing on growing your business. And one thing you want to do here is you want to understand the most important forms that you need to pay attention to. So let's first talk about that. So I want you to look on the screen right now. So this is how Form 1095A looks like. So it's called Health Insurance Marketplace Statement. And so you have a Part 1, Part 2, and Part 3. I'm just showing this to you on the screen so you have a clear idea how this form looks like. I mean, you have other forms though. You have a Form 1095B and also 1095C. But I first want to focus on 1095A. So basically, you have recipient information, Part 1. Part 2, you have covered in the individuals. And Part 3, you have coverage information. And when we talk about coverage information, you have all kinds of months. So you have January, February, March, and so on and so forth. And it's one of those things where you have to have a clear idea what really works for you and what really applies to you, rather. Okay. Now, everything I'm telling you here actually has to do with the federal taxes. Okay. Because you got to really understand that there are certain forms that are also applicable to state taxes. But for this, we are speaking about the federal taxes, and everything revolves around the Affordable Care Act. So ACA. So this is actually the form, or if you will, the law that deals with the health insurance coverage. And it's one of those things where, I mean, some people call it Obamacare, but the official name here is the Affordable Care Act. And one thing I want to say here is that, again, it doesn't matter if you're a small business or you're a large enterprise, you will still actually will have to not qualify. You have to comply with all the directives that came from ACA. And Form 1095A is a really, really important document to pay attention to. One thing I want to say here is that this form, you can actually file it electronically. Well, using software, not a problem. But if you are interested in knowing more about how to file it manually, so watch this show till the end. By the way, boss, welcome back to the show. It's really a pleasure to have you here. Make yourself comfortable. You are going to enjoy today's conversation. So let's really dig a little deeper here. So what are 1095 for forms? It's important to understand that you report health insurance coverage on the 1095 forms. And those forms are filed annually. And any employer who provides coverage for employee health insurance has to file Form 1095 forms. So 1095 forms are basically, the way I want you to think about it, they're basically a group of documents introduced by the Affordable Care Act in 2014. And they include Form 1095A, 1095B, and 1095C. And basically under the ACA, employers and health insurance providers are responsible for submitting the relevant 1095 form annually, and they help the federal government determine a few things. First of all, whether or not individual employees were eligible for health insurance coverage, during which month of the year they held coverage, and whether they received or were eligible for an advanced premium tax credit. So I already showed you Form 1095A. Now let's talk about Form 1095B. I want you to look right now on the screen. So this is how it looks like. You have Part 1, responsible individual. Part 2, information about certain employer-sponsored coverage. Part 3, issuer or other coverage provider. And Part 4, covered individuals. And so Form 1095B is one of the 1095 forms used to verify individuals have health insurance that provides at least minimum essential coverage, MEC, that's called MEC, throughout the year. So Form 1095B includes information on the type of coverage, as you just saw it on the screen, the type of coverage, the period of coverage, and any dependents covered by employer-provider health insurance plans. So it's filed and provided to employees of smaller employers, fewer than 50 full-time employees, among other entities who offer health insurance. It's also filed by private insurance companies outside the marketplace, government agencies like Medicare and CHIP, and other coverage providers. So this is pretty comprehensive in terms of the roster, if you will, the roster of entities that must file every single year Form 1095B. By the way, boss, I want to quickly remind you of today's topic. We are having a conversation about 1095 forms, everything you need to know. Next, I want to talk to you about Form 1095C, and I want you to look right now on the screen here. Here is how Form 1095C actually looks like. So you can see that you have Part 1, the employee, and then you also have on Part 1 you have applicable large employer member. So if you're like what they call ALE member, so if you're an applicable large employer member, you have to put that there. And so Part 2 actually it's employee offer of coverage, and here everything runs it's a pretty granular on a monthly basis. So you can see that all 12 months, and then you actually break down from January all the way through December. And remember that when you actually add the amounts from January through December, they must match what's shown in the all 12 months. So they are, again, the government just wants to have a clear idea of what the coverage really is. So Form 1095C is kind of similar to Form 1095B, because it reports on the health insurance coverage offered by employers and details whether or not employees participated in that coverage for each month of the year. And so the difference is that Form 1095C is actually used by a larger employer, those with 50 or more full-time employees. If you remember earlier, I was just talking to you about the ALE member, the applicable large employer member. Okay, so this is really 1095C is used by those large members. Those ALE members. And if you have been employed by a company with more than 50 employees since the Affordable Care Act took effect, this is likely the form that you would have received. It lets the federal government know if an individual had any gaps in coverage and whether they are liable for paying the individual shared responsibility payment, also referred to as the individual mandate. So it's one of those things where basically the concept of ALE is sort of linked, sort of tied to in the individual shared responsibilities that you need to really pay attention to. One thing I want to say before closing here is that when we talk about 1095C, you have to understand that it's one of those things where you have to have a clear idea what applies to your situation. And even if you're an ALE member, there are situations where the a specific case might not be applicable. And one thing I also need to talk about here is that you need to understand what specific case will really determine your coverage, really. The thing is, when we talk about Form 1095B and 1095C, it's really important to understand that those forms are different from Form 1095A. Now, the primary difference between 1095B, 1095C, and 1095A comes down to 2 files and sends each. Okay, so Form 1095A is less applicable for small businesses and employers because it's only sent out by the marketplace. So the marketplace actually takes care of sending out that form. The form includes much of the same information as the other two variations, but it's actually sent only to individuals who enrolled in health insurance coverage through the public healthcare marketplace. And the purpose of the form is to actually confirm coverage and dates and to determine whether an individual received or was eligible for an advanced premium tax credit. Very important. Now, having said that, if you were self-employed and buy your health insurance coverage through the marketplace, you should expect to receive Form 1095A. Okay, so that's really what it is. And now, why are employers actually required to file 1095 forms, really? The thing is that, it's one of those things where the whole idea was to make sure that we have comprehensive healthcare coverage, right? So employers and other health insurance providers are required to file 1095 forms as a result of the introduction of the Affordable Care Act, the ACA, which was passed on March 23rd, 2010. So under the ACA, all eligible individuals were required to hold minimum essential coverage, MEC, throughout the year. So when an individual chose not to get health insurance, and let's say health insurance coverage with exemptions from accessibility, affordability, and other factors, they pay a penalty called the individual shared responsibility payments, often called the individual mandate. So the penalty is based on the individual's income, time spent without coverage, and other factors. Okay, and now the federal individual mandate was repealed for tax year 2019 and later. However, some states still require individuals to hold coverage or pay a penalty. So this is one of those things where you have to see what really works for you. So 1095 forms let the government know which employees are liable for paying the individual shared responsibility payment. By the way, boss, I want to quickly remind you of today's topic. We are having a conversation about Forms 1095. Now, if you're listening to me right now, the big question is, do you actually need to submit a 1095 form? Well, 1095 forms are not the kind of payroll form that every employer needs to file. So you might be wondering how to tell if you are required to. In brief, employers must file either Form 1095B or 1095C if you had at least one full-time W-2 employee during the prior year and you provided self-insured health insurance coverage to employees. And if you are required for any reason to file one of the 1095 form variations, you must send a copy to both the IRS and each employee. If your business employs more than 50 full-time or full-time equivalent employees, then you, the employer, are required to file Form 1095C forms for each employee, and even those who decline coverage. So the thing is, the bottom line here is that when it comes to a Form 1095B, though, there is an important distinction to be made between health coverage providers and sponsors. This is really important, especially when it comes to the ACA language. So a sponsor is whoever arranges the health coverage. For example, if somebody receives health coverage through their job, the employer is considered the sponsor. So that's for the sponsor. What about the provider? Now, the provider is a company or organization that actually pays the medical bills themselves. Okay. In most cases, the provider will be an insurance company, in which case the insurer must send out the 1095B form. Additionally, a self-insured employer is both a sponsor and a provider. And in that case, the employer would send out the 1095B. So if you and your employees pay a premium to an insurance company, then that company is the provider and therefore responsible for sending out 1095B forms to your employees. However, if you choose to self-insure, meaning instead of premiums, you pay employees' medical bills yourself, then you are the provider. In the latter case, you are responsible for filing and sending out 1095B forms. And now, which 1095 forms should you file? Well, in short, if you employ fewer than 50 full-time employees and provide them with self-insured health insurance coverage, then you should actually file Form 1095B. This variation of the form is used by smaller employers and other health insurance providers. So while employers with fewer than 50 full-time employees aren't always required to offer health insurance coverage, offering coverage can help you be more competitive in hiring and can actually offer some tax benefits when you file. Now, if you employ more than 50 full-time employees, you're required by law to both provide minimum essential coverage (MEC) and to file Form 1095C. So how do you actually fill out Form 1095 forms? How do you fill it out? Now, it's important to understand that, when we talk about 1095 forms, there is some essential information that the IRS wants to see. So your own company details, this is kind of a quintessential. So by company details, I'm talking about your trade name, your employer identification number or EIN, the insurance company who provided the coverage, if you are under that sort of stipulation, the name of each employee on your insurance policy, in addition to their social security numbers, their respective SSN, and the months during which each person was covered. Remember, 1095 forms are filed once a year. So when we talk about the months during which each person was covered, we are looking at, the IRS is looking at granularity here. The IRS seeks granularity. Okay, so you got to be as detailed as possible. And the cool thing is that once you have the right info at the ready, 1095 forms are exceedingly simple to fill out. All you need to do is fill in the employee and their dependents information and check the box for each month they held coverage with you. And so in terms of filing 1094 forms, it's one of those things where you have to really understand. When we talk about 1095, we also have to think about the ancillary Form 1094. Form 1094B and Form 1094C are transmittal forms, essentially cover sheets that employers and health insurance providers must use when actually filing their accompanying 1095 forms. In essence, they detail the employer's information and contact, as well as how many employees were covered and how many 1095 forms you are filing. So when should you submit your 1095 forms? Well, IRS forms 1095B and 1095C are both annual filings. I've said this before. That means what? It means employers and health insurance providers who are required to submit 1095 forms are only required to do so once per year. And for the vast majority of businesses, these forms are due to employees by February 28th and also due to the IRS by February 28th if filing on paper, or March 31st if filing electronically of each year. So how do you actually submit 1095 forms? Well, it really depends. So when the time comes to submit the applicable variation of Form 1095, what you do is that you have a few options if you're an employer. So you can e-file online. So this is actually the preferred method that a lot of our business clients choose. You can mail in your form. You can work with an account to file it for you. So you have a third party that actually does it for you, and you can have any combination of the above. So when we talk about e-file online, basically, it is faster, it is more accurate, it is more secure. So in order to file your Form 1095 or any other IRS forms, you will need to either have a tax software or work with a tax professional who is an authorized e-file provider. And the IRS put together a list of approved software and authorized e-file providers to help you choose. So if you have any question, let us know in the comment section, and we'll certainly get back to you in terms of guidance. We'll give you more guidance in terms of what can really work for your specific situation. So this is for email, not email, e-filing online. You can also mail in your form. So basically, remember that you have to print the applicable Form 1095. You'll mail this plus the applicable 1094 form to the corresponding address for your state. You can find the correct mailing address on page 4 of the instructions for Form 1095B or page 3 and 4 of the instructions for Form 1095C. And you can also work with an accountant to file it for you. So, okay, this is kind of cool. So you can have an EA, you can have a CPA. So tax professionals can both fill out and file any necessary variation of a Form 1095, and will also fill out and file the applicable 1094 forms. So this is kind of cool in terms of helping you get everything done. So bottom line here is what? Bottom line here is that 1095 forms report the health insurance coverage that employees are offered, the dependents and levels of coverage in the months during which the employees held minimum essential coverage according to the ACA. So all employers with more than 50 full-time employees or full-time equivalents must provide MEC and file the form annually. And employers with fewer than 50 full-time employees who provide self-insurance coverage must also file Form 1095B annually. Thank you so much for your attention. I really appreciate it. Let's quickly do a recap here. So in today's conversation, I was just talking to you about 1095. And so I'll give you the overview and finally the recap. Thank you so much. God bless you. I'll see you another time. Until then, remember, stay marvelous.